We started 15 minutes late, and so I'm going to allow us to go until 9:15. That gives us 30 minutes for questions. As I said at the beginning, we're going to allow Notre Dame students to ask the first 4 questions. After that, the microphones are open to anyone. We'd like to keep a brisk pace for the questions, so please limit your questions to about 30 seconds, and I've asked the debaters to limit their responses to about 2 minutes. I'll take the liberty of urging people to get quickly to their point if these time limits are violated. We have microphones here and here. I think we have microphones. Oh, good. I can see the microphones in the balcony, so I'll just go in a circuit.
Thank you. Dr. Harris, if Dr. Craig could link out of your objections about the problem of evil and the problem of choosing the right religion, so that those weren't really problems, those weren't functioning in the debate, where does that put you dialectically? How do those function in the debate?
Do you mean if I was given good reason to believe that Christianity is true?
Or if Dr. Craig could show that choosing a particular religion wasn't necessary for the grounding of morality, just that some religion being true was sufficient for there being a grounding for morality, and that the problem of evil was somehow answered.
Well, I would never be tempted to dispute that we could make up a religion that, if true, would be a grounding of morality. I mean, those imaginary schemes are there for the asking. We could make them up, and in about 5 minutes, we could make up a better religion than any that exists. I mean, you just take Christianity and cut out Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and already you've done great work. And we could rewrite the 10 Commandments in less than 5 minutes and improve upon it. Add being kind to children and swap out the bit about the graven images, and you've already made it a much wiser document. Now, but that's not the point. I mean, the point is that one point I made, which he never really addressed, is that you're smuggling in a concern for well-being. In any case, you just have a different timeline. If Christianity were true, it would be part of my moral landscape. I mean, if someone like myself is going to suffer in hell for eternity based on what I'm currently thinking, then I clearly am doing the wrong thing. I mean, I would want that information, and I would think, that would be a revelation to me, which I would take seriously, and I would do everything I could to get into heaven. I mean, that would be, heaven is if eternity in heaven versus eternity in hell is really the landscape that we're living on, well, that's part of my moral landscape. It just changes its temporal characteristics. There's just no reason to think that that's the universe we're living in.
Thank you. Up and to my left.
Hi. Professor Craig, you made an interesting analogy. You said that long before we could explain scientifically where light came from, we could distinguish between light and dark, and that the same could be said for good and evil. But to me, that analogy seems dangerous because long before we could explain scientifically where light came from, we said it came from God. Could the same be said for morality? And then also, how do you explain shifts in moral consensus over time?
Okay, I'm not sure I understood all of the questions, so I might need our moderator to help me here. The last part of the question was shifts in morality over time. Don't confuse moral ontology with moral epistemology. Moral ontology is the foundation in reality for objective moral values and duties. Moral epistemology is how we come to know the goods that there are and the duties that we have. And clearly, affirming that there are objective moral values and duties doesn't mean that we always know them infallibly. Clearly, over time, there's such a thing as moral growth and moral development. When I look at my own life, I look back at my life as a young man, and I can see certain attitudes and things that I had that I now would be ashamed of morally. I think I've experienced moral growth. So there's no reason to think that the objectivity of moral values and duties implies that there isn't such a thing as moral growth or a clearer apprehension of the good, or sadly in some cases, a moral degeneration of a society and turning away from good. So these are two different problems, and my concern is moral ontology. Now, I didn't catch the first part of the question. Mike, did you?
Yeah, tell me if I misrepresent you, but I take it that she's asking, you say that we understood light and dark before we understood the physics of light. She says, but we posited supernatural explanations for light also at that time. Why not think morality's in the same situation?
Yeah, again, I think you misunderstood the analogy there that I'm making. What I'm saying there is distinguishing moral ontology from moral semantics. And what I'm saying is I'm not offering a moral semantical theory about the meaning of the words good and evil, right and wrong. I'm talking about their foundation in reality. And so the example of light was simply to give an example of where people understood the meaning of the English word light, even if they didn't know its physical nature in terms of electromagnetic radiation.
Can I clarify? Sorry. I get that you're arguing that there needs to be a source for good and evil. That makes sense. But why does that source have to be God? Could it not be that we just haven't discovered what the source is yet?
Well, that would be my second contention, that in the absence of God, I can't see any foundation that would be left for affirming the objectivity of moral values, and particularly the value of human beings and conscious life on this planet. And then that second problem about objective moral duties is especially serious, the is-ought distinction, and then the ought implies can problem, no free will. So that would just be to reiterate the arguments I've already given as to why I think in the absence of God, there wouldn't be objective moral values and duties.
I allowed the follow-up only because there was misunderstanding, just so you know. Up and to my right.
Yeah, I've got a question for Dr. Harris. So a lot of the argument, I guess, I felt like it depended a lot on the definition of good and bad, right and wrong. And I wanted to ask you if you thought it would be possible for there to be, so I've got a two-part question, for there to be a hypothetical God that, scratch everything you know about Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, create your own new God, and if it would be hypothetical for this God to perfectly align with your definition of moral theory. So say that this God says and commands that good and bad are dependent on the well-being of conscious animals. And then simultaneously to that question, whether you think a God of love does just that. Because it seems to me, in my experience and looking at history, that there is no greater continuum across human history than the presence of love, and the fact that we've had marriage, whether homosexual, heterosexual, transgender, from the moment we've been living animals. And so if that really is the root of our well-being, then how does a God of love not promote well-being? So, but answer the first part first.
Yeah. Well, love clearly has a lot to do with our well-being. And if there were a God of love who was really acting like a God of love and was making, the problem is the existence of God doesn't really add to the moral stature of love in that case, because, or the moral stature of the good. I mean, this goes to the Euthyphro dilemma that we haven't spoken about, probably, mercifully. But, I mean, if it's either intrinsically good or it isn't, and for God to say it's good doesn't make it more good, and it's not good by fiat. So he's either saying it's good because it is good, in which case we can just deal with the fact that it is good, or it's just good because he says it's good, but then he can say any evil thing is good, which Dr. Craig's God does rather often, apparently. So, but love is clearly something we desperately want in our lives, and we're right to want it. We're deeply social creatures, and the fear that is sort of circulating here that well-being somehow leaves something out that's important, I think, and I argue at some length in my book, is quite unfounded, because whatever you bring to me which is truly important, you say, okay, you're talking about well-being, but here I'm talking about self-transcending love. This is really important. Well, self-transcending love is probably at the core the deepest well-being that we can experience as human beings. But likewise, if the Christian hell exists and awaits me, well-being in the end is predicated on avoiding those flames. And so that means all of that, you're smuggling in a concern about consciousness and its future changes, whatever you bring in the moral domain. And so I'm saying we must be honest about that. We ground this in consciousness, and then we can talk about how human beings like ourselves can thrive. And I would grant you that love is probably on the top of the list.
Down here to my right.
Mr. Harris, from my personal experience and from my faith, I find that Christ's first commandment was to love thy neighbor and thy God. And I believe that if you are a Muslim, then you follow through with that. If you are a devout Muslim and you care about the well-being of all mankind. And it's kind of in relation to my next question, which is like, how would a naturalist respond to amazing miracles by God, which, like, say, the miracle of the sun, which was witnessed by 30,000 to 100,000 people in Fatima, Portugal in 1917, as well as miracles of the Eucharist, in which the Eucharist actually starts to form veins and bleed, and where this blood is actually tested and is found to be AB positive from the left ventricle of the heart. And it's actually been researched under leading pathologists in New Zealand to actually be throbbing and living as it was in his laboratory for the 30 days.
Okay. The problem with miracle stories are that they truly are a dime a dozen. I mean, the miracle stories that cash out Christianity are miracle stories set in the context of the pre-scientific context of the first century Roman Empire, attested to by copies of ancient Greek manuscripts that have thousands of discrepancies. Now, there are miracle stories that you can find in India today, attested to by living eyewitnesses. So you look at the people surrounding someone like Satya Sai Baba. Thousands of Western-educated people go to India, spend time with Satya Sai Baba, and come away claiming that he's performed a variety of miracles. And in fact, if you add up all those stories, every miracle attributed to Jesus, including the resurrection of the dead, is attributed to Satya Sai Baba. I mean, and millions of people think he's a living God. These stories, from our point of view, don't even merit an hour on the Discovery Channel. Okay? And yet, 2.3 billion people think that the miracles of Jesus are worth organizing your life around. And that I think is an intellectually unsustainable disparity. Now, I'm not closed to the evidence of miracles, and it would be trivially easy for God to convince me of his existence or the powers of psychic powers of saints or whatever it is. I mean, if you can tell, I've got a 20-digit number written on a piece of paper in my wallet.
I'm not God, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay. But if you tell me what that number is, then we have a very interesting miracle on our hands.
And I still don't...
I can't let the follow-ups continue. Sorry. We have a whole bunch of people lined up. Yes, over here.
Dr. Craig, I know you wanted to kind of stay away from the epistemological questions, but I need some advice. Because accepting an objective good, I guess, where do we go from that practically? Because something happened to me last night where, I've been a Christian, but last night God appeared to me and he told me that homosexual lovemaking was every bit as beautiful and loving and good as heterosexual procreative sex in the system of marriage. And he said, come and let everyone know that. I said, no, God, they won't believe me. They will not believe me. How do I? Where do we go from here practically with divine revelation? Do I leave my church and follow?
Your feigned sincerity about this, isn't fooling anybody. It's not the topic of tonight's debate. I'm not even going to address a silly question like this.
I didn't mean to offend you. I'm serious.
Sorry, we aren't doing follow-ups with the question. I allowed the one up there because there was a misunderstanding, but the question has come out. It's received an answer.